Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. I hope you are all well. This is your host Shabbir, and welcome back to the Ilm Feed podcast. Really excited about today's show. I've got a brother with me who we've been meaning to meet for a long time. Genuinely, like, it's fallen through a couple of times. Finally got to meet him for the first time, and even better, got him straight onto the podcast, right? So our first proper conversation and chat is going to be quite interesting. Let's put it that way, right? We have someone who recently has been making a lot of noise, mashallah. If you're following him on social media, then you would know he's been all over, literally all over. When I say that, like, last I checked, he was in Jamaica. Then next thing you know, he's on a tour in the USA, and now he's touring here in the UK. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our dear brother Mustafa Briggs. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good, man. Tired, but good.
Tired, yeah. Well, I can imagine a lot of traveling recently.
Yeah.
Where have you been in the recent months?
Oh gosh. So January.
Yeah.
Just to talk about the year, January I was in Nigeria.
Okay.
I did my lecture beyond Bilal in Nigeria. February I was in America. I did a USA tour because Black History Month in America is in February.
Okay, it's in
and
February.
that kind of got extended into March.
Right.
Then I came back. Then April I traveled to Senegal and Mauritania.
Okay.
Because my sheikh is in Mauritania, and every April he has a gathering there. So I went to Mauritania for that, just, spiritual detox. Came back in May, back to Egypt where I live now.
Yeah.
That was Ramadan. Then I went to Morocco.
You're studying in Egypt?
Yeah, studying.
Okay.
Yeah, full time now.
Good.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
June or July I was in Puerto Rico.
Wow.
For
Okay.
Beyond Bilal. August I was in Jamaica.
Yeah.
And then this September, I just did another USA and Canada tour. So I went to Canada for the first time. And October, Black History Month. So I'm back here with you guys in the UK.
MashaAllah. Amazing, man. Amazing. Like, I can imagine why jet lagged and, feeling tired, a lot of traveling.
It's just crazy. And the way the bookings come in, especially for the UK tours, ISOC's like, it's not really too organized. So it's like, I'll get a last minute booking, have to travel to like Bristol or Leicester or somewhere crazy, and then come back in the day. So I got back home last night at about 2 a.m.
Wow.
Yeah, and then
You've got another one today, and obviously the podcast just before it. Alhamdulillah. But must be an amazing experience though, right? Just traveling and
it's been crazy. I never expected it to be like this at all.
Yeah,
I didn't expect my lecture. Like when I first started lecturing, I thought, okay, I'm gonna get 5-6 bookings and then it's done. I didn't now I've done the talk over 40 times now, like across the world, 5 different countries. So alhamdulillah.
Wow. So give some context to our viewers and listeners. Obviously, in the recent year or so, it's Beyond Bilal, which we're going to speak about in a bit more detail. And then now, in the recent kind of weeks, we've got Before Malcolm X.
Yeah.
Right? So I love the names. I love the concept behind it. So why do you think so many people have taken so much interest in it? And it's like, it's just, you're traveling now, lecturing. Like you said, you weren't expecting it. Like, is it something that maybe hasn't been spoken about or hasn't been done in this way?
I don't think it's been done in this way.
Okay.
It's been done before, and we have to mention like the shuyukh and the scholars who have tried to bring this knowledge out to the people before. So one of the pioneers was Sheikh Abdullah Hakim Quick.
Yes, from the US.
He's from Canada. Actually, yeah.
Canada.
He's American, but he's based in Canada. When I went to Canada, I actually got to meet him, and he shared some books with me and some resources, and kind of encouraged me, because there was a time when he was the only person talking about Black history and African history within Islam in the Western world in that context. And so he's written many books about the subject, and he's recorded a documentary, and he was the guy for the Islamic history.
Right.
Yeah. And so alhamdulillah, he was a pioneer in this, and there are a few other people. Habib Akande has also kind of delved into it from the UK, and a few others. But in terms of this day and age, and this time that we're in, like 2019, aside from Habib Akande, I think I'm the only person talking about this subject in the way that I am, and the way that I'm doing it. And obviously through social media and social media promotion, in their time, like for example Sheikh Abdullah Hakim's Quick's time, the internet wasn't even really a big thing. They were like out here selling CDs and DVDs and stuff. Like he was telling me when he used to come to the UK and he had his you know, cassette tapes and he was selling them. But now Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, all of these apps are they're helping to spread the message quicker.
No, definitely, and I think like very quickly, from what I've observed, you've almost become like the mouthpiece for this topic. It's very interesting to see, because literally every ISOC uni, I'm seeing your name pop up, which is great, alhamdulillah. And it's great to see that, because especially as someone who's younger from this generation, you can relate. And it's something that obviously is being picked up very quickly. A lot of people are taking interest in it, which is also really good. But coming back to how we're saying, like, you weren't expecting this, yeah? So let's give again some context. So like you went to like Harvard. Yeah, and these are places which I know, like prestigious places, universities. You went Oxford, alhamdulillah. And then recently we were just saying that you went to LSE, London School of Economics, and that's the same kind of platform that Malcolm X himself was on, Muhammad Ali was on. So what was that like for you? That was literally a few days ago as well, right?
It was literally 2 days ago. It was crazy, because through this lecture that I've been doing, Beyond Bilal, I managed to get, like, I've done over 40 universities, but Oxford was one of them, Cambridge was one of them. When I went to America, they have what they call the Ivy League, which are like the oldest and like most prestigious 8 universities in America. Harvard is included, Yale is included, and I did 4 of the 8 universities. Wow, so I did Harvard, I did Yale, I did Brown, and I did University of Pennsylvania, and I did Harvard again in the summer, but that was through my podcast that I have, the Baraka Boys. Shout out Baraka Boys, you lot follow up. Baraka Boys podcast. We were invited to talk about our experience as young Muslims in the West in Harvard. And then most recently LSE yesterday. And why the LSE one was interesting is because when I started doing these talks, it was usually the ISOCs or the Islamic societies that were bringing me in. And then it reached a level where the student unions were inviting me, or the universities themselves. And so with LSE last year, I did the event through the ISOC and I think the Black and Ethnic Minority Society. And then this year, they pushed it forward for me to be included in the LSE Public Lecture Series, which is like the platform that they give to like Kofi Annan, Nelson Mandela, Tony Blair, Margaret Thatcher, like all of the politicians and CEOs and all those kind of people. And when I finished giving my talk, and I was talking about, it was the new one, before Malcolm X, History of Islam in the Americas, they said, well, 2 of the people that you mentioned, Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X, also gave their lectures here as part of the LSE Public Lecture Series. So I feel like that was crazy for me, because there was a time I could have never imagined imagine that happening.
What was it like? Because I remember seeing on your Instagram story recently, like, it's funny when you think about it. Alhamdulillah, it's all tawfiq from Allah, like how, you know, you're going to these big universities here in the US, but then you mentioned how like you failed your A-levels, which is quite like it's a funny contrast when you look back, right?
Yeah, it's crazy, because like at the time when I was doing my A-levels and I failed them, the universities that I wanted to get into, I was rejected from all of them. And then I came back now 2 years later after graduating, and I'm giving lectures in all of the universities that I was rejected from. Wow. So I mean, childhood, it's all my childhood and my context, because according to, you know, statistics, or according to what people assume about people from particular backgrounds or ethnicities or socio-economic situations, I shouldn't be where I am today. And I shouldn't be doing what I am today. I am, you know, a young black boy from inner city London. I grew up in a single parent household. I never met my father, my biological father, till I was 20 years old. And that was through my travels that I met him. You know, there's a history of like mental health in my family. Because of that, I was sent to foster care, so I spent 4 years in foster care. And the time I was doing my A-levels, I was in foster care, so it was a difficult time for me where I couldn't really... I don't want to blame myself and say... I don't want to blame the situation, but I'll blame myself and say I wasn't disciplined enough with everything that was going on in my life to concentrate, to be able to put the effort in to my A-levels to get the results that I needed. And obviously my situation was a unique situation. Like I was living in a hostel at the time, because, you know, if you're in foster care, you'll be in foster care till about 18, and then they put you on this like independent living pathway. So you have to go into a hostel and wait to apply for housing, etc. So I was going through all of that at the same time as studying and just emotionally being in a place where, I mean, I have, alhamdulillah, extended family members that support me in the ways that they can, but they couldn't physically be there for me in that situation. So, you know, I wasn't living with my mother anymore, my father wasn't around, and it was essentially just me by myself with my iman and like my belief kind of just to push me through. If it wasn't for that, I mean, I have many people that lived in the hostels with me, or many people that I grew up with, that I went to school with. Like, I remember from the 5, like, I used to rap when I was younger. I was about 14, 15, I used to rap. From all the boys that I used to rap with in school, one of them's made it, and he's like a rapper. A lot of them, most of them went to prison. Some of them got stabbed. Some of them got arrested. Some of them have life sentences. Some of them have, so it's like growing up in that environment and seeing all of those outcomes. Some of them had mental breakdowns, and it's like only a few of us survived. And at the time, I didn't even really think that it was that serious. But looking back now and comparing the way I grew up and where I grew up and how I grew up with other people, it was like, yo, I didn't have a normal childhood. I didn't go through a normal lifestyle. So then to reach this stage in my life now where, you know, I'm being called by some of the most prestigious universities in the world. And honestly, I feel like embracing Islam was what saved me from a lot of things, because I embraced Islam when I was 13.
13.
Yeah. And even though I was involved with people who were living certain lifestyles and doing certain things, because I had that faith in Islam, I was like, do you know what, there's certain limits that I won't cross, there's certain things that I won't do. And I know that regardless of where I am now, I have a future in this life, and I have a future in the next life that I have to think about and consider. So, you know, that saved me from a lot of things. And I had guidance of shuyukh, like I had guidance of my teachers from West Africa and from here, who, you know, provided a good example for me and were role models for me at a time when I didn't really have any other role models. Like, I didn't have my father around to show me how to live my life. And for a lot of the other boys that I grew up with, they would look to the elders, like what we call the elders in the area, who were selling drugs, who were doing all these things as models for success, because we didn't see, as young black boys, successful black men outside of drugs or outside of the entertainment industry. It's only through, alhamdulillah, being exposed to my shuyukh that I was like, oh no, there are other models for success, and being exposed to their environments, and also within my family, like my mom's cousins. When I went, given the opportunity to travel back to Africa, I saw my uncles working for the government. I saw my uncles, you know, working for the UN. I saw, you know, different models for success that in inner city London, a lot of the time you're not shown. Even if you are shown positive role models, it's usually, oh, they're a singer, or they're a rapper, or they're a sports person. Growing up as a kid, I didn't do any sports. I couldn't play football. I couldn't play basketball. I'm not a stereotype. Do you know what I mean? I just like to read. Throughout my whole childhood, because my mother was always she always used to say, you know, oh, I can't afford to buy you video games, or I can't afford to do da-da-da. So I never had any consoles growing up. Till today, I don't know how to play PlayStation or Xbox. Like, I never had any of that. Growing up, I just loved to read.
Right.
And I was reading all the time. Like, I would take 10 books out from the library every week, max out my limit, read all my books, study, do all of that kind of stuff. And so for children like me, there wasn't really anyone I could look at and say, oh, this is how I'm going to be in the future at that time. But alhamdulillah, a lot of people would say I have become that person now for the Mustafas that were there 10 years ago that didn't have anyone to look to. And that's a blessing from Allah.
Alhamdulillah, that's amazing. It's amazing to hear. Very inspiring. So it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned how, like, you know, going through all of that, foster care, by yourself, you know, literally, like you said, your iman to pull you through. Because that's the thing, like, a lot of people would ask, how do you pull yourself, or how do you pick yourself back up in that situation where, you know, what would you say is a turning point for you? Like, you failed your A-levels, right? Now, you know, obviously you did end up going to university, you did end up graduating, right? So what did you do to, like, did you just think to yourself, you know what, I need to work hard, I need to push myself, went for your A-levels again, got into uni? Like, what was it? What was that moment for you?
Okay, so when I did my A-levels the first time, I was in foster care. I took my A-levels. I wasn't really concentrating. Like, I wasn't even really in class a lot of the time. Like, I was dealing with my own personal issues, and, you know, I didn't study. And I never had to study before A levels. Like I was
Right.
just one of those kids. I'd read the book in class and remember it, and then
Yeah.
take the exam and pass. But you know, when you reach A levels, you can't really do that. Like
Yeah,
my
yeah, yeah.
GCSEs were cool. I got 4 A's, 4 B's, and I went through. But with A levels, yeah, it was I got EDU the first time I did it. So that was like complete write off.
Yeah.
And I was just stuck because I had applied to. My dream was to always go to SOAS to study Arabic and economics.
Yeah.
And yeah, I got rejected from SOAS. I got rejected from all of my backup options, and I just didn't know what to do. And then at that stage, I thought to myself, do you know what? I can't give up. I can retry. So I reapplied. I retook my A-levels at Westminster Kingsway College. And even when I retook them, I didn't get amazing results, but I got enough to get into Westminster University. But going to Westminster, I wasn't given the option of studying Arabic and economics. I studied international relations and Arabic, which was amazing because then that opened the door for me to do an internship with an organization called the Global Diplomatic Forum. And I maintained my internships with them every summer for the whole time I was in uni. And like, for me, I always have a way of looking at life that I've inherited from my shuyukh. One of my sheikhs, I remember in Senegal, one day he was saying that if you read the story of Musa and Khidr in Surah Kaf, you are Musa and life is Khidr. There are many situations. So in the story of Musa Khidr, you see that Musa meets this teacher Khidr. And Khidr says, you can accompany me, but you have conditions. Don't ask me about anything that I do. And so Musa's like, okay, Bismillah, let's go on the journey. I want to learn the knowledge that you have to give me. And he sees Khidr destroying the boat. He sees Khidr killing the child. He sees Khidr repairing the wall. And he doesn't understand, why is Khidr doing all of these things that outwardly they look like they're gonna be disasters. And then at the end of the at the end of the journey, Khidr says, okay, this is the end of the journey between me and you. Let me explain why I did what I did. And then you saw that everything that outwardly looked as if it was a disaster, or looked as if it was a problem, or looked as if it was a barrier, or looked as if it was problematic, was in fact, there was a divine wisdom behind why it was being done. And it was for the benefit of the people involved in the situation. And with us, life is the same. There'll be so many situations that you come across and you feel like, oh, this shouldn't happen this way, or this shouldn't happen to me, or this is a disaster, or this is a problem. But in Senegal, they say, when Allah's fixing something, he looks as if he's destroying it. Like, you look as if, like me in that situation, I could have looked and thought, oh my God, my dreams, I wanted to go to SOAS, I didn't get in. I wanted to do this, I didn't get in. But if I didn't go through all of these things, I wouldn't be here lecturing in all of these places and talking to you on Ilmfeed podcast about it, being seen by thousands of people. So it's like the future of the situation, Allah knows why he's putting you in certain situations to train you and prepare you for a future blessing that you're about to receive. I 100% believe that. And so that was the ideology that was instilled in me as a child by my shuyukh. And that's what kept me through all of the terrible situations that I was going through when I was a teenager. Because now my adulthood, alhamdulillah, is very different from a lot of people's, and I feel like it's those teachings and that belief that kept me on track.
Alhamdulillah. No, that is amazing, and it's such a powerful point that you mentioned. Like, you could have looked back and thought, you know what, everything's gone wrong for me. But in fact, by that happening, another door opened up, and that door just opened up so many more opportunities for you. Alhamdulillah. So it's amazing, man. Coming back to so let's talk about Beyond Bilal. Very interesting name. I remember when I first came across the poster, I was like, ooh, okay, Beyond Bilal. Like, there's clearly a lot of meaning behind these two words.
100%.
So for me, I've never spoken to you about this, so let me just give you my thoughts on what I kind of took from that name. So for me, it's like Bilal radiallahu an, al-Habashi, so Abyssinian. He's kind of like the reference point for Muslims, especially outside of the black community. So the reference point is being that, you know, like, I'm not racist because Bilal radiallahu an, he was black and he was Abyssinian, and you know, he stood on top of the Kaaba and he gave the adhan first mu'adhin, and that's kind of like the get out card. And sometimes what we might find is that there is like there's definitely an issue of racism and anti-blackness within the Muslim community, and that's kind of like a get out card. So what I felt like you've done is you took that beyond Bilal. Actually, it's not just Bilal Adlan. There is so much more to it in the Quran, from the Sahaba, and then the tradition continues contemporary, scholarship in Africa and beyond. That's kind of what I took from it. Am I kind of
You're
there?
exactly on point.
Yeah.
You're 100% on point. That's exactly what it was, because the time that I came up with Beyond Bilal, so I had finished my first degree. I did Arabic and International Relations at Westminster, and then I managed to get onto a master's degree program at SOAS.
Okay, great. So you made it into SOAS.
I made it into SOAS, yeah. They rejected me first time and second time, but third time they let me in. Third time's the charm, innit? So I was doing my master's, and my dissertation previously in Westminster was Arabic literature and literacy in West Africa.
Right.
Because many people don't know that the primary lingua franca of academia in West Africa, well, there was academia in West Africa pre-colonization. A lot of people don't know that. And the lingua franca of the educational institutes, such as Sankore University, etc., was Arabic. And so there are hundreds and thousands of manuscripts. Like the Sankore University had the largest library in Africa since the Library of Alexandria. They had over 700,000 manuscripts, all in Arabic or in Ajami, which was West African languages written in Arabic script. So I focused on that in my dissertation, and all of my professors, who some of them were Arab, some of them were English people who studied Arabic, had never heard of it, and they didn't even know that existed.
Okay.
And it's like a 1,000-year tradition that is ignored and completely unknown about in West African Islamic history.
Yeah.
So I covered that in my dissertation, and then I was talking about it to some of my friends. And there was a time one of my friends called Najwa, she had an interview with a BBC radio person, and they asked her, "Oh, can you be black and Muslim at the same time?" Okay. And Twitter obviously exploded, and everyone was having these discussions about the place of black people within Islam, or the experience of black Muslims in the UK. And so there were a lot of panel sessions happening at different ISOCs that wanted to deal with this subject. And the first panel session I was invited to, that was 2 years ago, was at King's College.
Right.
So the ISOC did an event. I can't remember what it was called, but it was about that. So it was me, one of the former heads of FOSIS, Yusuf, who is Somali, and then my friend Kyle Gray, who was also a master's student at SOAS. And so we discussed it, and they said, okay, we want you to give a presentation. And that was the same time there was also another YouTube series. There were 2 YouTube series done about the experience of black Muslims in the UK.
Right.
And so I watched all these YouTube series, and I saw all these discussions, and I just felt like a lot of it were black people complaining about discrimination, complaining about racism, complaining about feeling like they weren't made to feel a part of Islam or the Muslim community, etc., etc., etc. And then I thought to myself, okay, I'm a black Muslim, but I don't feel like that. I've never had to force my way to be accepted in an Asian or Arab Muslim space. Right. I just go to the masjid, pray, and leave. Like, that's not an issue. But I know that I'm connected to a legacy, like the shuyukh that I took Shahada from. I became Muslim through the influence of one of the biggest imams in West Africa. His name was Sheikh Hassan Cisse from Senegal. And his grandfather, Sheikh Ibrahim Niass, was named by Al-Azhar University as the Sheikh al-Islam of Africa. And he had the largest Muslim movement in the history of Africa, according to Western academics, not even according to his own followers. And so going to Senegal, going to Nigeria, going to all of these places and interacting with that community and understanding the history and the legacy of Islam in Africa, I was like, I don't feel out of place at all. And I feel like the reason why all of these things are happening, okay, it's all good to complain about it and speak about your experiences. That's a part of the process. But we need to look forward as to what are we going to do to solve this issue. And for me, I felt like black Muslims themselves don't know enough about their place within the religion, and people outside of the black community don't know enough about the place of black people within the religion. And so that's why with this combined ignorance, you can have racism and you can have all of these discrimination and people not feeling a place. Because if you look into the deen and the knowledge that you've been given doesn't place you in the narrative, and you don't know about the history of how it relates to you, you'll feel out of place. And then at the same time, the people that are not part of your community, if they don't understand your role within the development of the religion, you're going to be out of place as well. And the usual as you said, get out card when speaking about these difficult issues is always, oh, well, you know, there's no racism in Islam because Bilal was black. There was the Mu'adhin. But I was from my traditional studies. So after I got into my master's program, I left it and I moved to Egypt to do to study traditionally. So I'm in Cairo now, and I've always been studying traditionally. Like throughout university, I used to go to Mauritania and study. I used to go to Senegal and study. I speak fluent Arabic, alhamdulillah. And studying the traditional books, there's so much hidden knowledge in there that people are not exposed to that I felt would change the situation. Right. So I decided to take all of that knowledge out. I spoke about it at that first panel session at King's, and someone from Oxford was there, and they said, you have to do this again in Oxford. So then my second talk was at Oxford, and then it just continued to spread through word of mouth. And then last year, Black History Month, I said, okay, I'm going to take all these different presentations, because I did, for example, at UCL, History of Islam in West Africa. Then in Oxford, I did Beyond Bilal, Black History in the Quran. And then I did all of these different things. So I put them all together in one presentation. I had the best graphic designer in the world, Islam Yassin. Let me plug him. Islam Yassin designed everything for me.
It is an awesome poster.
He's alhamdulillah, he's amazing. I don't want to work with anyone except him, alhamdulillah. He designed everything for me, and I put it on Instagram, and I was like, well, I've spoken about this subject a few times. I have background knowledge. Does anyone want to book me to come to their university? And it blew up where I had 30 requests to come by different ISOCs. And so last year I did a 20 university tour in Black History Month. So every day of the month I was in a different university giving the talk, and then it just kind of exploded from there. But it was just, I formulated it as a remedy to try and help the situation. It's all good speaking about the negative experience of Black Muslims, but I feel like the way to move forward is through education. They need to be educated about, we need to be educated about our history and our legacy within Islam, and other people need to be made aware of it too, so that, you know, we can comply with Allah's command in the Quran, لِتَعْرَفُوا, so that we know each other and we understand each other.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that personally for you, you haven't had a problem per se, you know, you felt kind of accepted, but so...
Okay, I have had problems before. So like, I remember, for example, you know, just the typical thing of like going to the masjid and then someone, oh, excuse me, brother, are you new to Islam?
Right. I see.
Or going to, like, I remember I was in a bookstore in Edgware Road. It was like an Arab bookstore. And I saw, I love books. Anyone that knows me knows, like, books, money and food, like, that's my thing. So I went into the bookstore and I was like, and I was picking all these books. You know, there was the Diwan of Abu Nawas and all these like classical Arabic books. And like, I'm a big poetry person. So I was buying all these poetry. Diwan of Imam Shafi was there, and I picked them all. I had about 5 books, and I took it to the counter, and the guy was Egyptian, and he was talking to his friend, and he was like, I don't know what this little black boy wants to do with all of these books.
Really?
And they were laughing. And they thought I didn't understand what they were saying.
Okay.
So I started laughing too, and I replied to him in Fusha. I was like, sorry, I didn't understand everything you said because I speak Fusha and clearly you don't. And I was like, but I studied Arabic, I read Arabic books, and that's why I'm buying the books. That's my business, buying these books. So do your job and sell me the books. And do you know what I mean? You get these microaggressions and you see these kind of things, and they all come from places of ignorance. But I've never have those situations make me feel like I'm out of place. And that's because I understand my history and my legacy as a black man within Islam.
You're grounded.
But I feel like for a lot of people, we don't have that, especially in the UK, because the knowledge that we're given doesn't include our narrative or our history within the mainstream teaching and of Islam. And so for a lot of people, they do feel alienated. They do feel, and it goes one of 2 ways. I see that with a lot of, especially black converts to Islam. Either they leave Islam or they come away from Islam because they don't feel like they're accepted within Muslim spaces, or they decide to try and assimilate and become Arab or become Asian. So you see black people like changing their name to Abu something and wearing polyester tops and trying to say Yani in every sentence when they can't speak Arabic because they feel like, oh, in order for me to be a good Muslim, I need to try and be an Arab, or I need to try and be a Pakistani, or I need to try and, because they don't know that they have a culture and a legacy within the religion, and they're being made to feel by these people as if your essential nature does not fit in with Islam. And I've discussed that on the Baraka Boys podcast. We had an episode, I think it has like nearly 100,000 views now, about racism. And it was calling out, there was a particular da'i that said some racist statements. And we kind of broke it down in the podcast to say, like, the way that he was speaking and what he said, because he was saying to a group of people on the street, you know, brothers, we are not black. Let's stop acting like we're black. Allah doesn't like We're not Jamaicans. We need to behave properly. We need to behave civilized. And it's like, okay, well, if you're a black Muslim hearing those statements, that then means essentially what he's trying to tell you is that your essential nature and your culture and the way you are is not acceptable to Allah, and it's not acceptable in this religion. So then where do you go from there? Alhamdulillah, I've been grounded with the tradition to know, to not let that affect me, but there are thousands of others who went. And so that's why I did Beyond Billah. And to also remove people who would make statements like that anyway as well.
Of course. So what you're saying from both sides, so those people within the black community and those outside who might be pushing anti-blackness, whether it's openly, subtly, you're saying that the main solution would be for both sides to be well grounded in this knowledge, to understand the legacy,
100%. Understand
the tradition. That makes a lot of sense. So I want to get into the actual, because we've been speaking about the context a lot. I want to get into a bit of, give us a taste of, so when we say Beyond Bilal, let's start with the Quran, because let's be honest, like in the Quran, we mentioned Musa alayhi salam, for example, already, and obviously there's many prophets that are mentioned in the Quran, many stories, but I would say personally that majority of Muslims don't know what black history is in the Quran itself.
100%.
Right? And obviously the Quran is not going to state it like, okay, this person is this person is that, because obviously Allah's focus isn't on that, but it's still good to, you know, look into it, research it, right? Which you've obviously done and you've spent a lot of time doing. Let's start with the Quran. What are give us some facts. Drop some facts for us.
So with the Quran, for example, I look at the fact that the Quran itself, if you look at 50% of the stories that happen in the Quran, they take place in Africa. Okay. Because ancient Egypt is in Africa, and it was an East African nation. Because before the Phoenicians and the Greeks and the Romans and the Arabs invaded Egypt and mixed in with the population and the Ottomans, they were East African people. And, you know, genetics tests, DNA tests on all of the mummies will show you that this was a black nation. So they look nothing like the Cleopatra movies and all the movies that Hollywood pushes on us. So if you look at the fact that 50% of the stories of the Quran take place in Africa, and if they don't take place in Africa, a lot of the stories have significant African characters in them, such as Suleiman's wife Bilqis, who comes from East Africa to Jerusalem to visit him, or Prophet Ibrahim's wife Hajar, who's also ancient Egyptian, that marries him and settles in Mecca later on. That kind of signifies that Africa has a place in Islamic history. And then looking at figures in the Quran themselves. So I looked at, for example, Adam, Musa, and Isa, just as case studies. Adam is Abul Bashar, the father of humanity. Allah, when speaking about the creation of Adam, the famous verse that we always talk about is Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. We're placing a representative on the earth, etc., etc. There's also another verse in the Quran where Allah says, Inni khaliqun basharun min salsalin min hama'in masnun. I'm creating a man from black mud that was molded into shape. To understand the Quran, you have to go to the tafsir. All of the major mufassirin, Tabari, Qurtubi, Baydawi, Baghawi, Jawhari, like Jalaluddin Suyuti and Mahali in Tafsir Jalalain, when they discuss this verse, they all say Hama in Masnun is a black mud. Some of them even go as far as saying it's a mud that is either black already, or they leave it until it becomes black, and then they create something from it. So one of the, I think it was Baydawi or Baghawi, he said, a lot of people say Allah fermented the mud that Adam was created from and left it until it became black and then created Adam from it. And then Jawhari in his tafsir, he says, a lot of people say the reason why Adam was named Adam was because he was Adam alone, Adam in complexion. So what does Adam mean? Go to Lisan al-Arab, the first Arabic lexicon and the most widely referenced Arabic lexicon. They say Adam means black. And when somebody's darker than asmar, which is dark brown like our color, they're described as Adam alone, or Adam shadidul adma, like they're very, very dark skinned. So the usage of this word to describe the first human, and it also correlates with science, because we know the first human beings were found in Africa and they were black people, and the black genes are not recessive. So any other nations will derive themselves from that, but they can't, the scientific aspect of it. So already just from that, the fact that there are over 10 traditional mainstream tafasir that state or propose that Adam was black, that's knowledge that's within our books that people don't know about. A lot of people study and they'd never even heard of these things. And until you go to the tafsir itself, it's something that's not highlighted because it's not seen as important. But it was important enough for those scholars to include it in their tafsir. 100%. So, alhamdulillah. Then Musa, we have a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ is describing different prophets. So he says, for example, Ibrahim, if you want to know what Ibrahim looked like, look at your companion, talking about himself, meaning he's the one that looks the most like Ibrahim. Then he speaks about Musa, وَأَمَّا Musa فَرَجُلٌ Adam. He was a dark-skinned man. And then he talks about him having curly hair as well. And then, going back to the Quran even, one of the miracles of Musa, أَسْلُكِ يَدُكَ فِي جَيْبُكَ تَخْرُجُ بَيْضَاءَ مِنْ غَيْرِ سُوءٍ. If you put your hand into your pocket or underneath your armpit, when it comes out, it will be bayda, it will be white. If he wasn't non-white in the first place, that wouldn't have been a miracle. And so when you look at the tafsirs, Tabari says, وَأَمَّا مُوسَى فِيمَا ذَكَرْ لَنَا كَانَ Adam. Musa was, according to what we were told, Adam in complexion, the same as the original Adam. He was a black man. And so his changing color, his hand changing color was made a miracle for him. And all of the other mufassirin, when they talk about this ayah, they say the same thing. And then they quote some of them, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ talking about him to confirm this. Isa, same thing. So there's different ahadith. Some say he's Ahmar, light skin. Some of them say he's Adam. But Ibn Umar, the son of Umar bin al-Khattab, says, Wallahi. And you know, when they said Wallahi, it meant something. Serious, He said, Wallahi, the Prophet ﷺ never said he was Ahmar. But he said that I had a vision of 3 men doing tawaf of the Kaaba. The man in the middle was Adam. He was dark-skinned with long curly hair, and when I asked who he was, I was told that he was Isa ibn Maryam. So those are the father of humanity, the father of the Judaic tradition, the father of the Christian tradition. Well, not the direct father, but the main figures of all of these traditions, all described as black men by the Quran itself, or by the Sahaba, by the Prophet ﷺ, or by the Sunnah. And even if you look at Umar bin al-Khattab as well, because I go into, from the Quran, I go into black Sahaba beyond Bilal. So we've all watched the Omar series. Omar series looks, if you look at it, Omar looks like, you know, what your stereotypical light-skinned Arab person would look like. But when you go into the books, you realize that his grandfather, Nufail bin Abdul Uzza, was half Ethiopian and half Arab. And then he had his son, Al-Khattab, with an Ethiopian woman. So Umar bin Al-Khattab's father, Al-Khattab bin Nufail bin Abdul Uzza, was 3/4 Ethiopian and 1/4 Arab. So the way Omar looks in the NBC series is probably not how he looked in real life. And you have similar narrations with Ali ibn Abi Talib. He's described as Adam, Shadidul Adma as well. He's described as dark skin, and others. And then I speak about black Sahaba that are not mentioned aside from Bilal. So there are other Habashis there aside from Bilal. The Sahaba that spent the most time with the Prophet ﷺ from the day he was born until the day he passed away, Ayman, who he referred to as his mother, Ummi Ba'da Ummi, my mother after my mother, who raised him as her own child from the age of 6 when he was in the house of his uncle and his grandfather, was an Ethiopian woman. Bilal's mother, who was a princess, Hamama, was also there as a Sahaba. Salim, one of the freed slaves of Abu Hudayfa, he was one of the Quran teachers for the Sahaba, and he used to lead the Sahaba in Salah, in military expeditions. Sumayya, the first martyr, and there's a list of about, I think, 30 Sahaba that I mentioned that were black Sahaba that were there in the time of the Prophet ﷺ that nobody really speaks about. And even the fact that the first openly practicing Muslim community wasn't established in Mecca or Medina, but was established in Africa, in Ethiopia, under Najashi. That was the first time Muslims were allowed to practice Islam openly and freely. And at that time, Mecca didn't accept Islam, and Medina didn't even exist. But on the shores of Africa, we had a Muslim community. So the story of Islam as we know it today starts in Africa even. So all of that, I kind of wrap it in the first half of the presentation. And then the rest of it goes into the history of Islam in West Africa, because most black Muslims are West African descent. In the Americas and in Africa. And we have nations such as, for example, Nigeria has nearly 100 million Muslims, more than the whole of the Arabian Peninsula.
Wow.
And that's just one country from Africa's 54 countries. Or, well, the numbers always change. But yeah, 50-something nations in Africa. Just one of them has more Muslims than the whole of the Arabian Peninsula combined.
Wow.
And I talk about how Islam entered there, because when black people go to masjids or when black people enter certain spaces, people assume they recently come into Islam. When we have reports from northeast Nigeria that they accepted Islam from emissaries sent by Omar bin Abdul Aziz. That's in the 8th century. We have on the other side Ghana and Takrur, which were the main empires in West Africa before colonization 1,000 years ago, in what is now Senegal and Mali. They were the first Muslim nations in West Africa. They officially accepted Islam, the kings of those nations, 1,000 years ago. And already before they accepted Islam, we have reports of scholars from the south of Spain coming in saying that we met the king of Ghana. He wasn't Muslim, but the minister of the economy was. A lot of the ministers in his parliament were. And there was already in his capital city 12 masjids at the time when the king wasn't even Muslim. And the king converted to Islam 1,000 years ago. So that means it has a over 1,000-year history within that region, which is something that a lot of people don't know or don't talk about. So when you see a West African Muslim, don't assume that they just recently came into the deen. A lot of them are descended from scholars who have been Muslim for over 1,000 years. And even the most, and I'm talking a lot, but I'll end it on this point. Even the most famous slave narrative that we know in the West is the story of Roots. Kunta Kinte. Anyone that doesn't know Roots, Roots was like, it was released in the 60s, and it was about this slave from Gambia called Kunta Kinte who was taken to America, etc. Kunta Kinte was Muslim. And what was interesting is that if you read the book Roots, Alex Haley, who's the descendant of Kunta Kinte, narrates that Kunta Kinte's grandfather was Kairaba Kunta Kinte. He came from Mauritania. He was a scholar from Mauritania. And he was named after his grandfather's tribe, the Kunta. The Kunta tribe were one of the oldest tribes in West Africa, and they're the descendants of Uqba bin Nafi, who was a Sahaba who conquered Africa with his uncle Amr bin As. So Amr bin As conquered Egypt and settled in Fustat, which grew into Cairo. His nephew Uqba bin Nafi went on into Tunisia and established a place called Karawan, and that became a center for learning in Africa. And from there, the Maliki madhab, etc., spread throughout. His descendant Fatima Fihri went to Morocco and opened a masjid, which they called Masjid Qarawiyyin, the masjid of the people from Karawan. And that became, as we know, Qarawiyyin University, the oldest university in the world. Kunta Kinte is from the same tribe as Fatima Fihri, because they're all descended from Uqba bin Nafi. So that's a hidden history there that a lot of people don't know. And then that links in with America, because how many African Americans now, like Alex Haley, are descended from Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ, and they're from Quraysh, but they didn't even know. All of that kind of links in. And then I end the presentation after speaking about the history of Islam in West Africa, focusing specifically on female scholarship within the West African tradition, because we have a long tradition in West Africa of female scholars, hafizas, teachers, and it's not an ancient tradition, it's something that still exists today. So I speak about figures like Nana Asma or Danfodio, who was the daughter of Usman Danfodio, who founded one of the West African khilafas, the Sokoto Khilafah, that still exists till today in Nigeria. She was a scholar. Her father was one of the first people to issue a fatwa against female genital mutilation. He fought for female education, etc., in the Hausa society at the time. And so his daughter was a scholar, a teacher. She was a member of her father and her brother's government. And she had an all-female movement called Yantaru that used to go around opening schools and teaching women, and she used to write in 3 different languages. And I talk about the daughters of Sheikh Ahmed Bamba, like Sheikh Muslimatu and Sheikh Maimuna, who, like Maimuna, for example, Sheikh Maimuna Mbake hand-wrote 20 Qur'ans from memory and gave them to her father as gifts. And then I talk about the daughters of Sheikh Ibrahim Niass as well, who are West Africa's biggest female Muslim scholars to date. So like one of them, Sheikh Ruqayya, for example, was advisor to President Jimmy Carter of the United States on his projects that he was doing in Africa. Another one, Sayyidah Khairi, she was given an award from an American university because she has an organization, an NGO, that has over 200,000 members in Niger that fight for women's rights, build hospitals, build schools for women and children. And Sheikh Mariam Niass, whose son is the professor of Islamic studies at Harvard, today, Usman Khan. Sheikh Mariam Niass has one of the biggest Quranic schools in Africa, in Dakar, and hundreds of thousands of children have memorized the Quran from her and her students. So all of this is contemporary female Islamic scholarship that we don't really see. We don't really see women like Sheikh Ruqayya writing books and being sent by her father to teach. Like Sheikh Ibrahim Niass gave Shahada to a group of 5,000 people in Ghana in one day. Really? The documents are in the British Library. They were talking about it. The community that he gave Shahada to, he sent his daughter, Sheikha Ruqayya, to them to live with them, to teach them Islam. And she took her books with her. And so I have pictures in the presentation of her with her male students who had memorized the Quran from her and are studying fiqh and all of the Islamic sciences from her. And, you know, this is a narrative that we don't really see, especially with the Muslim world and all of the stick that we're given with how Muslims treat women.
Yeah.
You don't really see female scholars or hear about female scholars, let alone seeing female scholars establishing not just religious movements but social movements and becoming major political figures and social figures in their community solely based on their deen. It's not through feminism that forces them to abandon their religion, but they're empowered through their religion and through actual correct implementation of their religion to become major figures in their society and change makers. Yeah.
Wow. I think by the way, that's the longest time I've been silent on a
podcast. Yeah, you have to chop that up.
I've been listening to you.
Yeah, so I speak about all that, and the presentation's like over an hour, so I go into depth about all of these things.
Even an hour is not enough time.
Yeah,
everything that you just mentioned to do justice to it. Amazing, man. Like, there's so much to unpack from what you just said. I can imagine that whole presentation. A few interesting points. So depiction, for example, like you mentioned, Umar ibn al-Khattab, or even Isa, obviously the depiction, right, complete opposite of what you've been saying. And then obviously going back to the point of how obviously, you know, 50% we're saying, you know, even of the figures that are mentioned in the Quran, African, because they're from Egypt, which a lot of people forget. It's funny because I think it was like yesterday or the day before when I was teaching an Arabic class, and then I think one of the students asked me like, why is Musa and some of these names, like, why don't they accept, you know, like Tanween, right? So I was like, yeah, because it's a non-Arab name, right? Yeah. And they were like, what do you mean it's non-Arab? It's not an Arabic name, like what's it, Sulaiman and Yusuf, it's not Arabic. I was like, no, they're not Arab names. Like, what do you mean? I was like, yeah, because Egypt is not in Arabia.
Yeah.
They're like, it was like a light bulb moment for them, because you forget these things, right?
Yeah.
But then based on that, we would then say, because majority of the prophets mentioned in the Quran, Bani Israel, right? There's only a very few that are, you know, bar the Prophet ﷺ, Hud, you know, a few others that were sent to the Arabs. The rest are Bani Israel. So what we're then saying is that these prophets, are we then going to say that these are originally African? Yeah.
Well, a lot of people do say that.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
there is.
Because I know people that have done like DNA tests, and it's literally been traced back to like Bani Israel.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So what we saying here?
I would say it's an interesting one, because if you look at Bani Israel, it means the children of Israel.
Yes.
And Israel was a name for Yaqub.
Yeah.
His children moved into Egypt.
Yes.
His 12 sons moved into Egypt, and they settled there for a period of over 400 years. So if you trace lineages through the father, they're all Bani Israel. But when they're in Egypt, obviously they're marrying Egyptian women.
Yes.
They're integrating into the Egyptian society. And so through their patriarchal lineage, they're Bani Israel, but genetically, their majority, by the time of 400 years of living in that community, they're going to end up being African. And so you see depictions of Musa being dark-skinned, being black, because just like Umar bin al-Khattab is Qurayshi, he's Arab, but his father's 3/4 Ethiopian. So, you know, the mix between East Africa, Africans in general, and Arabs and Bani Israel, etc., that's all something that I feel needs further research, and people need to look into it and just think about it more. And then obviously through that, there is a large movement of people who say that, you know, a lot of the West Africans and black people are descendants from Bani Israel.
Yeah.
And, you know, that there is that whole movement. And even within, so like my mother's Gambian, right?
Yeah.
Within Gambian history, we have historians. For example, one of my ancestors was a historian in Senegal called Yoro Boli Jow. and he was the first person to write the history of Senegal in French,
Right.
because his father was a chief, and so the French, what they were doing, they were taking the sons of all the religious leaders and the kings, etc., and putting them in French school to try and integrate them into the French colonial system. But he spoke to the oral historians who preserved the West African history to write the history of the tribes of Senegal. And in his history book, he said most of the tribes in Senegal are descended from ancient Egyptians. And he even narrates like which pharaohs were leading the country at the time when they left Egypt and moved west into these areas.
Yeah.
And so a lot of tribes do take that, even if that's not Bani Israel, that's ancient Egypt. And Sheikh Anta Job says the same thing. He said he makes interlinks between the Wolof language and ancient Egyptian language and shows that they are connected. So a lot of the West African tribes do have ancient Egyptian ancestry. Yeah.
Very interesting. If anything, everything that you've kind of mentioned demonstrates that there's a lot of reading to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of reading to do, and there's a lot of research to do.
A lot of research and a lot of things that are, ignored, or a lot of things that are just not paid enough attention to. Like, it's there, Adam alayhi salam's story. We all know it.
Yeah, and all the tafsirs that I quote are tafsirs we all study.
Exactly.
Yeah,
but it's just like these details are never really brought to light, which again kind of feeds back into this whole idea of going back to the beginning of our discussion, where you mentioned that a lot of people are actually ignorant of these things, and that feeds into a further problem of anti-blackness or other problems within the community. So I think all of this kind of ties in really well, and I think you're doing a great job with the presentations and the seminars, and I would say, guys, book him. Book him, inshallah. Just contact Mustafa, contact the team, and get him at your university, wherever it is. And clearly, he's been around the world, so just get him wherever you need to. Inshallah, he's happy to travel, and it's much needed. Just covering the last few points, inshallah. So, after Beyond Bilal, now you're working on the recent seminars, which is Before Malcolm X, another interesting title. And I also kind of got a sneak peek out of you where you potentially are going to be speaking about black history in the UK, which I hope we can, inshallah, in the future, hear from you, inshallah, definitely. But let's talk about the more recent one, or you've been, like you said, LSE, you're going to be delivering one today. What is that? How is that different to the other seminars?
Okay, so I mentioned all the stuff I spoke about in Beyond Bilal.
Yes.
And so I was traveling, so it was two major things. Last year I got married to an African American. She's half African American, half Mexican. But she comes from a community where she's a fourth generation Muslim.
Right.
So many people assume Islam is very recent, it's growing in recent times. And when I was speaking to my father-in-law about Islam in America, I realized there's so much history that as a UK person, I didn't know. Because whenever Black History Month comes up, all the Muslim organizations do a Malcolm X event.
Yeah.
If you're lucky, you get a Bilal event, but mostly it's Malcolm X, right? So I grew up going to all these Malcolm X events. I knew the story. And for me, I just assumed that, Islam in America amongst black people started with Malcolm X, Nation of Islam. Then after Malcolm X comes back from Hajj, people realize, oh no, there's Sunni Islam, and start converting, and that's how it spreads. That's the usual narrative that we're given. Whereas my father-in-law comes from a community that were Sunni Muslims since the 1920s.
Right.
And they have a sheikh. Their sheikh is actually Pakistani. He lives in Pakistan, and they established their own communities in America where they have their own towns, that they have their own schools, they build their own houses, etc. And so there are pockets of Muslim cities and towns across America that are run by African American Muslims based on Islamic principles, and nobody knows about that. And they were existing at the same time that the Nation of Islam were existing. And so traveling throughout America, I was meeting different people and seeing all these different narratives in February. And people were asking me, well, why don't you mention America in your presentation? Why don't you talk about the African American Muslim history? And I said to myself, do you know what? African American history and the relationship of Islam with America deserves its own presentation. So that's what I did. I gathered all the information I could, and I made the new presentation before Malcolm X. And many people are booking me thinking it's a Malcolm X event. They're like, oh yeah, the Malcolm X event, brother, you're going to come and talk about it? And I'm like, well, that's how I catch them, innit? I'm like, Malcolm X, put him on the poster. But I actually speak about the history of Islam in America leading up to Malcolm X,
Yeah.
which is a very long history that many people don't know about. So to give you an example, Mansa Musa,
Yeah.
king of Mali in the 13th century, richest man to have ever lived,
Yeah.
$800 billion US dollars net worth according to modern day times. 75% of the world's gold in the 13th century came from the Mali Empire. He goes on Hajj, stays in Egypt, depresses the Egyptian economy for 10 years with the amount of gold that he spent, him and his entourage of 72,000 people.
72,000.
But in one of the interviews, he
Yeah.
explains how he became the king of Mali. And he said, I became the king because my brother, Mansa Abu Bakr, wanted to explore the extremities of the Atlantic Ocean because he didn't know what was on the other side and he wanted to find out. So he sent a crew of 200 boats across the Atlantic and only one boat returned. So then he said, I'm going to go myself. He had 2,000 boats full of people, black, West African Muslims, and 1,000 boats full of resources, food, water, etc. And he says to Mansa Musa, I'm leaving the kingdom in your hands, and goes across the Atlantic and never comes back.
Right.
When Ferdinand Columbus and Christopher Columbus arrive in Hispaniola, which is now known as Haiti and the Dominican Republic, they say, we see the native people bringing handkerchiefs to us. And these handkerchiefs are the same handkerchiefs that they make in Guinea and Sierra Leone and in West Africa. But I don't see how they could have had any connection because West Africa's all the way over there and this place is all the way over here. But those are the same miscalculations that made him think he was going to India and ended up there in the first place. He says he sees them wearing almazars, which are the same cloths that the women in Granada in southern Spain are wearing. They have guanine, which is like gold. It's a gold that's 18 parts gold, 6 parts silver, and 3 parts copper. Guanine is the Mandinka word for gold, which is the language of the Mali Empire. So there's a correlation where many people propose, and there were books. There's one professor called Leo Weiner who wrote a book called, I forgot what the book is called, but you can Google Leo Weiner. And he says that Africans arrived in America before the Americans, before the Spanish. So that's a 700-year history of Islam in the American continent. That one maybe can't be confirmed. People can debate that. But what you can't debate is the transatlantic slave trade, which is the 15th century. You have slaves like Kunta Kinte, who's descended from a Sahaba and who comes from a line of scholarship that goes back all the way to the Prophet ﷺ, captured. People like Ayuba Suleiman Jallo, who was a Hafiz of the Quran and the grandson of a scholar, and he handwrote the Quran from memory in slavery 3 times, and he was freed, taken to England, sorted out the Arabic documents in the British Library. His letters were translated by Oxford University, and then he was sent back to Africa. You have in Jamaica another slave, Abu Bakr Sharif, who's descended from a Sharifan family who were the descendants of Maulay Idris, the first king of Morocco, who moves into Mali. So his descendants moved into West Africa, spread across West Africa. They settled in Mali, in Timbuktu, and Abu Bakr Sharif was captured, renamed Edward Donlan, and taken to Jamaica. It's discovered that he can read and write Arabic, he's a Hafiz, he's a scholar, and so the king of Morocco actually intervenes to get him freed from slavery, and he goes back to Morocco for 2 years and then goes back to Mali. Then there are other slaves who weren't as lucky, like Yaro Mohammed, who who freed himself from slavery after 40 years and bought property. He used to lend money to traders, and he even had shares in one of the first banks in Washington, the capital of America, and Omar bin Said. There's so many of these slaves whose narratives come up, and they represent thousands of slaves whose narratives are not heard of, who are all, mashallah, Muslims, and a lot of them scholars because of the strong legacy of scholarship in West Africa. And we have the first slave revolt that happens in that side, in the Americas, 1522, the Hispaniola revolt against Christopher Columbus's son. It was 20 Muslim slaves from Senegal that did it. And after that happened, the king of Spain, says any slaves that are Muslim or have exposure to Islamic teaching should not be allowed on the island, because he fears that Islam is leading to them being revolutionaries. And that island became Haiti, which is the first island to be free in the 200-300 years ago, and they freed themselves from slavery and colonization, and it was the legacy of these Muslim slaves that led to that. The same thing with Brazil. Most of the slaves people assume were taken to North America, but Brazil had more slaves from Africa than anywhere else. And there was a community of Muslim slaves in Bahia, and my brother Habib Akande wrote a book about this, so I would recommend everyone check out the book. In Bahia, there's a community of imams who established madrasas. They teach the Quran, and all of the slaves from different parts of West Africa who couldn't communicate through their tribal languages would communicate with each other in Arabic. And they also had a slave revolt, which led to the beginning of the independence for them in Brazil. And up until 1910, there was a community of over 100,000 African Muslims in Brazil descended from these slaves. So I talk about all of that and all the figures that lead up to Malcolm X, because you can see that the legacy and the history is very, very strong. And that's just about 25% of what I talk about. So book me to see the rest.
Exactly. One post that I read recently, someone I think tweeted it. It's basically saying that when people usually focus on, when people speak about black history, then their focus goes immediately, whether it's in talks, whether it's in documentaries, or even Hollywood movies, it goes to slavery. But there's so much more, like you were mentioning, like the scholarship and the history that's behind it. Do you agree with that statement, saying that people automatically go there?
I agree with that statement 100%, and I feel like instead of referring to these people as slaves, you need to refer to them as being enslaved. They were enslaved people because they weren't born as slaves, and that wasn't all that they were. And I do feel like people like to twist and change narratives. So why is it that, for example, whenever Bilal is mentioned, they say, oh yeah, Bilal, he was a slave and he was freed. But whenever Sayyidina Yusuf is mentioned, nobody says he's a slave. Nobody refers to him as a slave. He's Yusuf, he's a prophet.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, in the time of Musa alayhi salam, Bani Israel
were slaves.
Enslaved.
Yeah.
They were enslaved, right?
Yeah. But nobody paints them with that picture. But anytime it comes to black history, oh yeah, the slaves. Speak about them outside of the context of slavery. Because I remember there's a famous quote, black history doesn't start with slavery. Black history was interrupted by slavery.
Wow.
So, that's it. So I talk about a lot of the people that were enslaved, but I refer to their history, their culture, their legacy, because they come from a strong tradition. And I do feel like it is a microaggression when people are referred to as just as slaves or in the context of slavery, when their history is way more than that, when there are other people, figures in the Quran. Musa's family, Harun was a slave, or he was enslaved. Yusuf, again, enslaved. But because they're not depicted as black, then they're not spoken about as slaves. Maybe after Beyond Bilal, people will start...
Inshallah, changing perceptions here. Changing perception, 100%. But like you said, there's so much more to discuss. Unfortunately, this podcast won't allow us to get into it. But like we said, definitely through your seminars, through the work that you do, inshallah, a lot more people will be made aware. And if anything, it will inspire them, like we said, coming back to the beginning, to look into it further.
And I do want to add one thing. I'll end it there. I want, through my work, for this not just to be limited to Black History Month, and not just to be limited to, let's talk about Black history to make it look like we're not racist.
Yes.
I want it, and I'm doing all of this to move the narrative into the mainstream along with everything else. Why is it that whenever we speak about scholars or scholarship, we talk about Morocco, we talk about Syria, we talk about Yemen, but people don't talk about scholars from Pakistan, or people don't talk about scholars from West Africa as mainstream? It's always like a niche thing, or if they're even acknowledged as well. And so I don't want it to just be limited to Black History Month and Black History events, but I want it to become something where whenever you're talking about the great figures of the Ummah, whenever you're talking about the great scholarship and the legacy within the Ummah, it's in the mainstream, and it can come away from being something that we speak about once a year or in a particular time and place to something that's discussed amongst the legacy and tradition that we have as a whole. Because we never have Andalusian History Month. Whenever we talk about the Islamic Golden Age, it's Islamic Golden Age. Everyone embraces it, even though it was in Baghdad or even though it was in the south of Spain. So I feel like the same way we love and respect and honor our legacy as Muslims with Spain and with the Abbasids and with the Umayyads, we should also have that same love for the Mali Empire, for Timbuktu, for Senegal, for Nigeria, and for all of these other places.
It's an amazing way to summarize, and I wish you all the best. Honestly, I think you're doing amazing work. Been following it for a long time, and it's just been a real pleasure to have a chat with you and to break things down. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair, and may Allah bless you. And of course, to all of our viewers and listeners, I'm sure you really enjoyed and like you heard, like, I barely spoke. I gave the platform to Mustafa. He just led the way, and I'm sure you were just as engaged. There's a lot for us to take from that. Check out our dear brother Mustafa Briggs' work, inshallah, his seminars, his lectures. There's lots. Wherever you might be, inshallah, he might be there soon. And of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel on iTunes as well. Drop a comment below. Let us know what you thought of this podcast, inshallah. And I hope to see you again very, very soon. From your host Shabbir, from Mustafa, from the team. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.